God lifts the heavy burden you've been carrying alone. Watch this before you break. What if the weight you've been carrying isn't just a burden, but the very thing slowly draining the life out of you, day after day, in silence, while no one around you notices the collapse happening inside your chest? What if the heaviness that keeps tightening around your mind has convinced you that you're alone? Yet God has been whispering into the corners of your exhaustion, asking why you still insist on fighting battles that were never meant to be fought without Him. And what if the breaking point you're approaching isn't a sign of failure, but the moment heaven has chosen to intervene? There is a reason you clicked on this, a reason this message found you at the exact moment when something inside you was bending a little too far. A reason this title spoke to a part of you that you don't say out loud. There's a fatigue that sits deeper than tired muscles, deeper than sleepless nights, deeper than the pressure to look stronger than you feel. It's the kind of fatigue that whispers enough in the middle of the night. When no one sees the tears you wipe away. The kind that makes you wonder if God sees you at all. The kind that tempts you to give up because holding everything together has become a slow, painful surrender of your own soul. God knows that weight. The one you pretend you can handle. The one you say, "I'm fine" about, even when your chest tightens and the thoughts start spiraling. The one you push through because quitting feels wrong, yet staying feels impossible. You've been carrying responsibilities no one else even knows exist. You've been holding pain you don't trust anyone to understand. You've been fighting inward battles that never stop long enough for you to breathe. And you've been telling yourself that God must be tired of hearing the same prayer, the same fear, the same breaking. But hear me. God is not tired of you. He's not distant from you. He's not waiting for you to be stronger. He's waiting for you to stop pretending you don't need Him. He is waiting for you to drop what's crushing you and let Him be what He has always promised to be. When the burden becomes unbearable, His voice becomes unmistakably clear. When your strength runs dry, His presence becomes undeniable. When you reach the end of yourself, He reaches for you with a tenderness that disarms every lie that's been telling you to give up. You've been walking through days that feel heavier than your heart can hold. You've been carrying the guilt of not being enough, the fear of tomorrow, the weight of people depending on you, the shadows of your own doubts. You've been stretched thin, praying to survive what no one else even knows you're fighting. And in that quiet, suffocating space where giving up starts to look like relief, God leans close and speaks to the deepest part of you. Come to me. Let me carry what you can't. Before you let the darkness convince you that you're done, before you let hopelessness make the final decision, before you let the burden define your story, listen, this is not where you break. This is where you let God hold what has been crushing you. This is where you remember that the one who created you never asked you to survive life alone. This is where you let Him lift the weight that has been silently ruining your strength. This is where surrender becomes rescue. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Matthew 11:30. There comes a moment when the burden you've been carrying stops feeling like pressure and starts feeling like a slow collapse from the inside. You try to shake it off, breathe through it, ignore it, outgrow it, outrun it. But it clings to your spirit in ways you can't explain. It's the heaviness that settles behind your ribs, the kind that doesn't ask permission before tightening its grip. You keep waking up with that same knot in your chest, the same tremor beneath your thoughts, the same tightness around your hope. You tell yourself to endure it, to push through it, to stay strong because people depend on you, because life won't pause for your breaking, because giving up feels like failing. Yet there's a part of you that's wondering how much longer you can keep pretending this weight isn't draining the last pieces of you. There's a quiet pain you've been hiding. You carry it into every day like armor, even though it feels more like a chain. You smile when your heart is trembling. You speak confidently while your mind is unraveling. You keep functioning, producing, showing up, even when your soul is whispering that you're exhausted in ways sleep can't cure. You've been walking with a heaviness that tightens every time you try to breathe, and you've convinced yourself that this is what strength is supposed to look like. But deep down, something inside you knows that strength has given way to survival, and survival has started to feel like a slow drowning. There's a moment, usually late at night when the world is quiet, when the truth slips through your pretense. You feel the ache you've ignored all day. You hear the thoughts you've been trying to outrun. You remember the pressure you've been suppressing just to make it through. And in that moment, it becomes painfully clear that the burden you've been carrying is heavier than your heart was ever meant to hold alone. You've been fighting battles no one sees, bracing yourself against fears no one hears, whispering prayers that feel like they evaporate before they reach heaven. You wonder if God is near. You wonder if he still listens. You wonder if he notices how close you are to collapsing under the weight you keep saying you're fine with. But hear this truth rising gently into the center of your struggle. God sees what you're holding. He sees the pressure you hide. He sees the nights you can't breathe. He sees the fear you swallow. He sees the responsibilities stretching you thin. He sees the weight you never say out loud. And he does not stand at a distance from your pain. He steps into it. He steps toward the weight you've been carrying and whispers into the exhaustion you're too tired to admit. He calls you closer when everything inside you feels like it's drifting apart. You need to understand this before anything else. God never asked you to drag this weight across your own strength. He did not design you to shoulder every fear, fix every problem, hold every responsibility, or pretend to be stronger than your breaking point. Your burden is not a test of how much you can endure. It is the very place where God is waiting to meet you. The place where he speaks into the cracks forming in your strength. The place where he reminds you that he is not a distant God watching you struggle. He is the God who walks into the ruins of your strength and says, "Let me carry what is crushing you." You're not weak for feeling overwhelmed. You're human, and God is the one who turns human frailty into holy rescue. Holy. The moment you admit the weight is too much is the moment his strength begins to rise around you in ways you didn't know you needed. Surrender is not the end. It is the beginning of being held. Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. Psalm 55:22. There is a heaviness that doesn't show up in your posture, but shows up in the way your thoughts move. It pulls on everything. Yet no one around you sees it. You keep going, not because you're strong, but because stopping feels dangerous, like everything you've been holding together would collapse the second you pause long enough to breathe. So you push through the shaking, through the fear, through the silence inside you that keeps getting louder. You've convinced yourself this is what endurance looks like, but deep inside, there's a tension building, a quiet breaking that you've been pretending not to hear. What you're carrying has been sitting on your soul like a stone pressed against your chest. You feel it in the mornings before you even open your eyes. You feel it in the nights when your thoughts run too fast. You feel it in the moments when one small worry triggers the whole avalanche. It's more than sadness and more than stress. It's the weight of trying to keep yourself together in a world that keeps pulling you apart. And the worst part is how much of this you've been doing alone. You've been folding yourself into smaller and smaller spaces, hoping the pressure would shrink with you. It never does. It only grows. You've been walking through days that demand answers you don't have. You've been trying to act steady while your heart trembles. You've been trying to show faith while your inner world feels like it's shaking itself loose. You've been trying to keep smiling while something in you keeps sinking. You've been trying to convince yourself you're fine, but you know the truth. You're tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that wears down your spirit, the kind that whispers that you might not last much longer like this. And here's the painful part you rarely let yourself admit. A piece of you feels disappointed in God. You won't say it, but it's there. You wonder why the burden hasn't lifted. You wonder why the answer is taking so long. You wonder why the storm keeps dragging on. You wonder why the strength you need hasn't shown up in the way you expected. You wonder if maybe God is quiet because he's waiting for you to figure this out alone. But that's the lie that keeps tightening the chains around your spirit. God has not left you. He has not ignored you. He has not been indifferent to your pain. He has been watching you carry what was meant to be surrendered. He has been waiting for the moment when your strength finally admits its limit, because that's when your heart becomes open enough to receive what he has been trying to give you all along. You're not being punished, you're being drawn, you're not being abandoned, you're being invited closer. There are seasons when God allows the weight to press just enough to make you realize that the life you've been trying to hold alone is too heavy for human hands. Not because he wants you to break, but because he wants you to stop believing that survival depends solely on you. He lets the burden become undeniable so that surrender becomes possible. And surrender is the doorway where his strength enters the pieces of you that feel like they're fading. You're not failing because you feel overwhelmed. You're not faithless because you feel tired. You're not losing because you're breaking under the pressure. You are simply reaching the place where God begins to lift what you were never meant to carry. He steps into the ache you've been hiding and speaks life where exhaustion has been swallowing your breath. And in that sacred, quiet place where your tears fall without permission, he whispers to you in a way that only a weary heart can hear. You don't have to hold this alone. I have you. There's a breaking point that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but inside, it feels like the quiet shattering of something you've been trying to protect for far too long. It starts small, almost unnoticed, the way a single thought tightens your chest or a single worry spirals into 10 more. Then one day, without warning, you feel it. The moment when your strength gives a subtle tremor, when your hope flickers, when the weight you've carried for so long suddenly shifts and you realize it's heavier than you remembered. That's when the fear creeps in. Not the kind that screams, but the kind that whispers that maybe you won't make it this time. This is the part of the journey no one ever prepares you for. The part where you wake up knowing you've already lost the little emotional energy you had. The part where you're functioning on muscle memory while your heart quietly aches beneath it. The part where you tell yourself to push through, even though something inside you is begging for a moment just to breathe. You've been living in a constant state of inward tension, the kind that wears down your peace until all that's left is survival mode. And survival is exhausting when hope feels like it's slipping through your fingers. You've had moments recently where you felt close to breaking, where the pressure built faster than your prayers. You tried to steady your voice when speaking to others, holding back the tremor that keeps rising at the back of your throat. You tried to convince yourself that maybe things will turn around soon, yet part of you silently wonders why the breakthrough hasn't come. You want to believe the promises, but the waiting feels endless. You want to trust that God is near, but the silence feels louder than your faith. You've been carrying this tension in your spirit, trying to convince yourself you're still holding on, but inside, you're tired of pretending. And in this fragile place, a question slips into your thoughts. How much more can I really take? It's not a dramatic question. It's not spoken out of rebellion. It's spoken from exhaustion, from loneliness, from the feeling of being stretched too thin. It's the kind of question only someone who has been holding everything alone can understand. You didn't choose to feel this way. You've been pushed into it by life, by pressure, by expectations, by disappointments you weren't ready for. And the weight has become something you can't seem to escape, no matter how much you fight to stay afloat. But this is also the place where God draws closest, not to judge, not to scold, not to demand more of you, but to remind you of what has always been true. You were never meant to carry this alone. He knows the exact moment when your strength begins to fade. He knows the silent prayers you whispered between tears. He knows the nights when you tried to convince yourself he wasn't disappointed in your weakness. And he knows the cracks forming in your heart, the ones you try to hide from everyone, even from him. This is where his voice rises gently through the noise, not loud, not forceful, just steady enough to cut through the fear. Let me carry what is breaking you. Let me lift the weight that has been suffocating your spirit. Let me hold what you can't hold anymore. God is not asking you to be stronger. He is asking you to stop fighting alone. He steps into your heaviness with a tenderness that you haven't felt in a long time. The kind that wraps around the parts of you that are falling apart and whispers that the breaking is not the end. It's the beginning of being rebuilt. When you feel like giving up, that's not the moment of failure. That's the moment when heaven steps toward you with strength your hands could never hold. That's when God becomes the breath you couldn't catch, the peace you couldn't feel, the hope you couldn't find. It's in the breaking that his presence becomes undeniable. It's in the exhaustion that his hands become unmistakably near. There's a moment in every weary heart where the weight you've been dragging begins to blur your vision, and you start to believe the lie that this burden defines you. You don't say it out loud, but the thought has been echoing under your breath. Maybe this is just who I am now. Someone who hurts quietly, someone who holds too much, someone who keeps going while something inside keeps sinking. You tell yourself to endure it because stopping feels like the one thing you can't afford to do. Yet deep inside, there is a quiet cry rising from a place you've tried to ignore. I can't keep doing this alone. That cry is not weakness. It's not failure. It's the sound of your soul reaching the edge of its strength. It's the sound of a heart stretched beyond its limits. You've been trying to maintain balance while everything inside you sways. You've been trying to hold on to hope while your mind runs through every worst-case scenario. You've been trying to stay steady while life keeps adding pressure you never asked for. And all the while, that hidden ache keeps growing heavier, pulling on your spirit in ways that leave you breathless. You've been carrying more than anyone realizes. You've been whispering prayers that feel like they dissolve before reaching heaven. You've been fighting the same fears that you thought you had already defeated. You've been trying to be strong for others when your own strength feels thin. And in those quiet moments when no one is watching, you've wondered why God hasn't lifted this burden yet. You've wondered if maybe your pain is too small to matter or too big to fix. You've wondered if he hears your trembling at all, but the truth is deeper than your fear. God hasn't been silent because he's absent. He hasn't been distant because he doesn't care. He hasn't been slow because he's ignoring you. He's been near in ways you didn't recognize. He's been speaking through the tension you feel, through the exhaustion that keeps rising, through the moments when you finally admit you're not as strong as you pretend. He's been waiting for that moment when your heart becomes honest enough to let him carry what you've been guarding. God knows how much this weight has cost you. He knows the nights you spent awake, trying to breathe through the pressure. He knows the battles you've been fighting inside your mind. He knows the wounds you've been hiding behind your strength. And he knows the exact moment when your endurance is no longer sustainable. He doesn't meet you with anger. He meets you with compassion. He doesn't demand that you toughen up. He invites you to fall into his strength. This is where things begin to shift, not because you suddenly become stronger, but because you awaken to a truth that has been waiting for you. Surrender is not losing. Surrender is the doorway where God enters with a strength that does not crumble under the weight. He draws near to the breaking, the trembling, the exhausted, because that's where his presence becomes the anchor you've been longing for. He steps into the places you've been barely holding together and says, "Let me carry you before you collapse under what was never meant to be held alone." You don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to push through the pain as if God expects perfection. You don't have to hide the tears or silence the fear. This is the moment where you allow the burden to fall into the hands of the one who does not grow tired, the one who does not run from your heaviness, the one who meets you at the edge of giving up and whispers strength into the cracks of your soul. Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Matthew 11:28. There comes a point when the burden you've been carrying begins to shape the way you see everything around you. It colors your thoughts, it twists your expectations, it dims your hope, and without noticing, you start living as if the heaviness is permanent. You stop believing things can get better. You stop expecting relief. You stop imagining a future where your heart doesn't feel tight. Not because you've lost faith in God, but because you've spent so long carrying the weight alone that you've forgotten what it feels like to be carried. You've been walking through days that feel longer than they should. You feel the pressure building in your chest for reasons you can't explain. You feel your energy draining faster than you can recover. You feel your emotions stacking on top of each other without any room to breathe. You keep saying you're fine, but your spirit keeps whispering that something inside you is starting to break. And the truth is simple. You're tired of holding everything together with hands that won't stop trembling. There's a part of you that wonders if anyone truly understands what this burden has done to your heart. The way it's stretched you thin, the way it's silenced parts of you that used to feel alive, the way it's made you cautious, guarded, hesitant to hope again. You've been fighting your battles behind closed doors, carrying responsibilities that seem to multiply without warning. You've been showing up for everyone else while silently drowning in your own exhaustion. And deep down, you're afraid that if you let go for even a moment, everything you've been protecting will fall apart. But hear me with the weight of truth you've been needing. God does not step back when your burden gets heavier. He steps closer. The weight that feels like it's crushing you is the exact place where His strength begins to rise. You keep thinking you have to fix yourself before coming to Him. You keep thinking you must stabilize your emotions before asking for help. You keep thinking He's waiting for you to pull yourself together. But He's waiting for something far more honest. Your collapse into His hands. God is not impressed by your pretending. He is moved by your surrender. He is drawn to the moments when your voice cracks, when your hope wavers, when your heart trembles. Not because He wants you weak, but because He knows that the burden you've been carrying has been robbing you of peace, joy, and breath. He knows how long you've been holding it alone. He knows how many times you wanted to let go, but were too afraid of what would happen. He knows the weight you've tried to ignore because acknowledging it felt like defeat. But this is not defeat. This is the turning point. This is the sacred moment when God steps into your heaviness and says, "You don't have to be the strong one here. Let me lift what is breaking you. Let me hold what has been crushing your spirit. Let me take the weight off your shoulders before you collapse under the pressure. Let me show you that my strength is not distant. It is here, wrapped around your exhaustion like a quiet rescue. You don't have to know how to fix everything. You don't have to have the perfect prayer. You don't have to pretend you're okay. God meets you exactly where you are, in the rawness of your struggle, in the ache of your silence, in the weight of your tears. He steps into your burden with a tenderness that steadies what has been trembling inside you. And in that moment, His presence becomes a shelter you didn't know how much you needed. There's a moment when the weight you've been dragging begins to change the way you see God. Not because He has changed, but because your exhaustion has been speaking louder than your faith. You start wondering if He's disappointed in you, if He's tired of hearing the same cries, if He's waiting for you to toughen up before stepping in. You replay the silence in your head and convince yourself it means distance. You look at the broken pieces inside you and assume He expects you to fix them before coming near. But none of that is true. Those are the lies that grow in the shadows of fatigue, not the truth that rises in the presence of God. You've been walking through a season where your heart feels stretched thin and your spirit feels bruised. You carry tension in your chest that you can't explain. You carry fear in your mind that you never asked for. You carry responsibilities on your shoulders that were never meant to be held alone. And somewhere along the way, you began to believe that the burden itself is proof that God is distant. But the burden is not evidence of his absence. It is the invitation into his nearness. You've been praying for relief, but part of you has been afraid to fully surrender, afraid of what might happen if you stop holding everything together yourself. You've been afraid that letting go means losing control, when in reality, it's the doorway where peace begins. You keep thinking surrender is weakness, but surrender is the strength that rewrites your story from the inside out. It's the moment when God steps into the cracks you've been desperately trying to hide and fills them with something stronger than your own resilience. You've been carrying a heaviness that has shaped the way you pray. Your prayers have become whispers instead of declarations. Your hope has been quiet instead of confident. Your trust has felt fragile instead of firm. But God hears the whispers. God responds to the fragile. God meets you in the trembling. He doesn't need your boldness to move. He needs your honesty. The truth you've been scared to admit is the very truth he has been waiting for. This weight is too much, and you need him now more than ever. This is the moment where God begins to breathe strength back into the places that have been hollowed out by fear and fatigue. He doesn't meet you with judgment. He meets you with understanding. He doesn't ask why you're tired. He already knows. He doesn't ask why you've been struggling. He's been watching the battle inside you long before you had the courage to name it. And he doesn't step in to shame you. He steps in to steady you. He whispers into the heaviness you carry. He speaks into the places you've been afraid to confront. He touches the wounds you've kept hidden because you weren't sure you had the right to ask for healing again. And with a quiet authority that settles deeper than your fear, he reminds you of a truth your weary heart needs to hear. You are not alone. You never were. I have carried you through storms you didn't even see coming. I have held you in moments when you thought you were standing alone, and I will lift this burden from your shoulders because you were never meant to bear it in silence. You're not too far gone for God to reach. You're not too tired for him to revive. You're not too broken for him to restore. This burden is not the end of you. It is the moment where grace becomes undeniable. There comes a point when the burden you've been carrying stops feeling like something you're holding and starts feeling like something that's holding you. It grips your thoughts. It tightens around your hope. It whispers doubts into the spaces where your faith used to breathe freely. You've been trying to push forward, telling yourself that tomorrow will be different, that the pressure will ease, that maybe if you just try a little harder, you'll finally feel steady again. But the truth you've been afraid to admit is simple. The burden hasn't lifted because you've been trying to lift it alone. You've been moving through life with a heaviness that keeps stealing your strength. You feel it in your chest when you wake. You feel it in your mind when you try to rest. You feel it in your spirit when you try to pray but can't find the words. You've been living in a quiet storm that no one else can see, trying to keep your head above water while pretending the waves aren't pulling you under. And deep down, you've been wondering if God grows weary of your struggle, if he expects you to hold up the weight without flinching, if he's waiting for you to be stronger before he steps in. But God does not wait for your strength. He responds to your surrender. He comes close the moment your heart finally stops pretending it can hold everything together. The breaking you fear is not where he abandons you. It's where he reaches for you with a tenderness that doesn't fit the narrative you've been telling yourself. He is not disappointed in your exhaustion. He is not frustrated by your weakness. He is not distant from your tears. He draws near to the burden that has silenced you, and he sits in the ache you've been carrying. You've been trying to understand why the weight hasn't lifted, why the breakthrough hasn't arrived, why the answers have taken so long. But sometimes God allows the heaviness to remain just long enough for you to realize that the burden was never meant to be resolved by your strength. He lets the pressure expose the truth you keep overlooking. You need him in ways you've been too tired to say out loud. This is not punishment. It's the place where dependence becomes a doorway to peace. And here's the shift you've been waiting for, the one your heart couldn't find on its own. God is not asking you to endure this burden. He's asking you to give it up. Not partially, not cautiously, fully. He wants the weight you've been terrified to release, the fear you keep managing alone, the sadness you keep pushing through, the confusion you keep hiding. He wants the pieces that feel too fragile to expose. He wants the wounds that haven't healed. He wants the heartbreak you pretend doesn't hurt anymore. He wants the exhaustion you haven't had the words to explain. Because the moment you release what has been crushing you is the moment heaven begins to lift it from your spirit. God steps into the heaviness with a strength that does not strain, with a peace that does not waver, with a presence that does not retreat. He steadies the parts of you that have been shaking for too long. He breathes life into the places that feel empty. He restores what the burden has drained, slowly, steadily, fully. And in the stillness where you finally release the weight you've been dragging behind you, God seals the truth your heart has been desperate to believe. You were never meant to carry suffering in silence. You were meant to be held. Cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. 1 Peter 5:7. There is a moment, quiet and unmistakable, when the burden you've been dragging finally reaches the edge of your strength and something inside you whispers the words you've been avoiding. I can't do this anymore. Not out of defeat, but out of honesty. Not because you're giving up on life, but because you're giving up on carrying it alone. That moment is not the collapse you fear. It's the doorway God has been waiting for. The place where your hands finally loosen their grip on what has been crushing you, and your heart becomes ready to receive what only He can give. You've spent so long trying to hold everything together that you forgot the simple truth. Peace doesn't come from endurance, it comes from surrender. You've been fighting battles without rest, carrying burdens without pause, trying to stand firm on ground that's been shaking beneath your feet. You kept telling yourself you just needed to be stronger, try harder, pray better. But God has never asked you to be the hero of your own story. He has asked you to trust Him with the parts of you that tremble. This is the moment where everything shifts, not because the circumstances suddenly change, but because your heart turns in the direction of the one who has been pursuing you through every heavy step. God meets you exactly where you are, not where you pretend to be. He steps into the breaking without hesitation. He kneels in the dust of your exhaustion. He places His presence over the weight you've been carrying until it loosens its hold on your soul. And in that stillness, He speaks the words your spirit has been dying to hear. Let me carry this. Let me take what has been crushing you. Let me fill where life has drained you. Let me be the strength you no longer have. This is not the end of your story. This is the moment where God rewrites it, not with pressure, but with promise, not with fear, but with assurance, not with loneliness, but with the kind of presence that anchors you. The burden you've been carrying does not define you. The heaviness you've endured does not determine your future. The fatigue that has shaped your days is not your identity. You are His, held, seen, loved with a depth you can barely comprehend. Before you give up, look at where you are now. You're standing on the threshold of a different kind of life, one where you no longer carry weight alone, one where God's hands steady what has been trembling, one where peace begins to seep into the cracks that pain carved into your heart, one where surrender becomes freedom, one where your story begins to breathe again. Let this be the moment you release what has been crushing you and allow God to lift it before it breaks you. Let this be the moment where hope returns, not because the burden is gone, but because you finally let Him carry it. Let this be the moment where your heart whispers yes to the God who has never once left you alone in the dark. And now, With the weight you've been holding laid bare before him, speak these words not as ritual, but as release, as the quiet cry of a soul finally ready to rest. Prayer, God, I place this heavy burden into your hands. I have carried it alone for too long. I surrender the weight that has drained me. I give you the fear, the exhaustion, the pressure, and the pain. Lift what my heart cannot hold. Fill the places that have grown empty. Speak peace into the corners of my spirit that feel scattered and tired. Remind me that I am not alone. Remind me that you are near. Strengthen me in the ways I cannot strengthen myself, and teach me to rest in the truth that I am held, carried, and deeply loved by you. Amen.